I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Thursday, guys. Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you're new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Sabby and JB show, and you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and every other Sunday. Quick announcement, speaking of Sunday. So I will be live this Sunday, and Chris Hedges will be here. We have a lot to discuss, considering the fact that he was actually in London for that Assange trial. So don't miss that. It should be a really good show. But shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Rumble. We are back, guys. What is up, fam? What is going on? I want to go ahead and start out by giving shout outs to people in the chat. We have a big show tonight, and I know it's not there present. It was breaking news, but we will touch on the OJ Simpson story as well. Shout out to CBC Voter, says, happy Thursday, Sabby Sabs. Thank you. Greetings, P. Smith says, I'm still very grateful for you. That is really sweet. Thank you. Shout out to Patty Anderson for becoming a Sabby member. Let's give Patty a big whoop, whoop. Greetings, Lawrence says, Shaka when the walls fell. Shout out to Swampo. Thanks for covering my sis. Oh, thanks for covering my sis-in-law, Ashley C. Ford. Left her house, then confused when her voice came out my car speaker. Check her memoir, Somebody's Daughter. Thank you for that. And Swampo has been a member for 2 months. Shout out to Dr. Nick, says, hi, everybody, except Matt T. No hi for him. Oh, man. Oh, boy. Shout out to Retro Gamer, says, I'm sorry, Dr. Nick. What's going on, Mastermind, says, Rabbi Shmuley's newest model lines are called the Bill Mayer Teeny and the Destiny. Shout out to Eric T. Red, says, hello to Mastermind Hour. Do they come with tweezers? That's interesting conversation there. Shout out to Larez, says, sup, Sabrina, Eric, Corey, and Sabby fam. Is that student debt regarding Biden's latest attempt to trick voters into voting Dem? No thanks. Nancy's pivot reeks of class helping themselves. Only smash the like. We'll get into that story tonight. Shout out to Red 6, says, hello, Sabby. Greetings, Mark, says, Sabby. Shout out to Hannah, says, Alan Dorkwitz. Oh, boy, the jokes are already starting. Greetings, Layers of Snark, says, hey, y'all. Shout out to Trash Panda. Greetings, Metal Music, says, hey, guys. I don't know why I wanted to say it that way to you, but I did. Hey, guys. Shout out to Nas, says, hey, Sabrina, it's almost Friday. Yes, almost. And I'm getting pretty pumped for that. Ready for the weekend. Greetings, Natalie, says, just got back from seeing Dune Part 2. God damn it. When they run a 3-hour movie, they should have an intermission halfway through. Other than that, it was fine. Yeah, the 3-hour movies, like when I'm in the movie theater, can be like, it's difficult, because if I have to get up to use the restroom, then I'm going to miss part of the movie. Whereas if I'm watching a 3-hour movie at home, I can just hit pause and then come back to it. Shout out to Sakudo. You're all right. Greetings, Karen, says hello to Mastermind Hour. Shout out to Josie Fox, says hello, everyone. Josie and the Pussycats. It was a show. It was actually a part of Archie comics. I don't know if you guys ever read like Archie, Betty and Veronica, but I grew up on that stuff. Shout out to Nikki's World says, hello, everybody. Greeting all one same says, yay. Shout out to, I think I said Miguel already. Shout out to Roger Meadows says, drop that beat. Shout out to, I don't know, make sure I'm clicking on the same person. Shout out to Silver Surfer says, gamer peace. And greetings, Ravina says, hi, everyone. Driving Miss Macy says, new music. Driving Miss Macy. Oh, man. All right, guys, we have a lot to get into tonight. So I do want to go ahead and give a shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really do appreciate you doing the damn thing around here. If you're interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories. Ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters. Don't forget about those Sabbies. They're hanging in there too. And of course, there are also members. All of their names are listed here. You can also see their names scrolling across the bottom of the screen there on the ticker. Thank you guys so much for your support. I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons, Kathy Lloyd, Naima Fowler, and Sandy Molly. We call them newbies. Let's give it up for them. Thank you guys so much. Based. All right, guys, what are we discussing tonight? Again, I told you I'm going to touch on that OJ story as well. I wasn't planning to hear that news today, but here we are. Here we are. So let's go ahead and dive into that thumbnail to show you what we are discussing tonight. Let's go in. Tonight, we are discussing Norm Finkelstein rematch with Alan Dershowitz. That is going to be an epic conversation. We're going to dive into there. Lots to say and lots of you to hear if you have not heard this. We're also going to discuss KHANNA is called out. He got himself in a little bit of VP controversy here. You'll see the woman next to him. That's Nicole Shanahan. And the woman next to her is Melina Abdullah. We'll get into all of that tonight and how Roe tries to dig himself out of this situation. We're also going to discuss Nancy Pelosi pivots on Israel. Oh, Nancy. We're going to get into that. And we're also going to discuss the Biden student debt alarm. What is this really about? Of course, we know it's election year, right? We're going to dive into that, break that down. And last but not least, as breaking news is today, we are going to chime in and touch on this OJ Simpson story that was announced earlier today. Start us off right. Smash the like, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the OJ Simpson story. I was not expecting to hear this news today. Kind of came out of nowhere, to be quite honest with you. I kind of had forgotten about OJ Simpson. You know, sometimes you forget about people and then something happens like, oh yeah, I remember now. But OJ Simpson apparently did pass away today. Apparently he was battling cancer. I was not aware of that. Again, I don't think all of you were aware of that either. But that has been the big breaking story today. So I do want to go ahead and get started with that. Now, when it comes to the OJ Simpson, I was about to say the OJ Simpson case, but when it comes to OJ Simpson, some people remember OJ Simpson as a professional football player. Some of you may have remembered him from the Naked Gun movies. And then I think all of us, though, do remember him from the OJ Simpson trial, right? That was like the trial of the 90s. And I remember it was on national television, you know, and I think a lot of people who were born after that time, they just don't know what that experience was like. It was like you would get home from school every day and the OJ Simpson trial was on national television. It was watched, you know, all over the United States. Let's go ahead and dive into this story. And I have some things to say here about the death of OJ Simpson. Let's chime in.
OJ Simpson, the former NFL star who was found not guilty of the double murder of his ex-wife and her friend in 1995 in one of the most notorious trials in modern history, has died at age 76. his family announcing this news on the platform formerly known as Twitter, writing, quote, that OJ had succumbed to his battle with cancer. I want to go right to MSNBC's Katie Tur, who is joining us on the phone. And Katie, you have a family connection to the coverage, the news coverage during the OJ Simpson case involving his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. Give me your thoughts on this news and what's going through your mind.
Listen, anybody who lived in Los Angeles in the 80s and 90s and was old enough to remember anything about that time has a connection to OJ Simpson. It's hard to overstate the impact that OJ had on the city of Los Angeles from the time he was in college, when he was a Heisman winner at USC. He was a superstar football player. And then he was a superstar NFL player that was, in commercials. He was ubiquitous on cereal boxes everywhere. And then a Hollywood actor. The guy was well known, and so was his high-profile relationship with Nicole Brown Simpson, which was also highly volatile. And that ended in the horrific, truly horrific stabbing death of both her and Ron Goldman at their house in their townhouse in Brentwood. This was just around the corner, down the street, Anna, from my middle school. And the middle school was overrun with cops and road blockages, and then tourists who were trying to get a glimpse, a macabre glimpse of the crime scene. OJ's house was just up the hill from us. There were helicopters flying overhead all the time, including my parents' helicopter. They were news reporters in Los Angeles.
Let's pause there for just a second. I want to chime in. And one of the things I think a lot of people may remember was that infamous white Bronco chase down the highway. I still remember that until this day, where OJ Simpson was just, and he says, one of the things he said later on is that he was just driving, that he wasn't running away from the police or fleeing. But a lot of us do remember that. I remember seeing that on national television, and I was thinking to myself, like, OJ Simpson is on the run. What is happening? What's going on? What's happening here? I think we also need to remember, in reference to the OJ Simpson trial, you have to remember that Kim Kardashian's father, Robert Kardashian, was actually one of the lawyers that represented OJ Simpson. So a lot of people may not remember that, but one of the things you have to know is that they were friends with OJ and Nicole. So the Kardashians and the Simpsons were actually close. Like, this is, it's not like he just hired some lawyer and say, represent me. They were friends. So I often wondered sometimes, like, how did the Kardashians feel about this trial? Like, after this happened, it's just got to be, it puts you in an awkward situation. And we know that OJ Simpson was found not guilty, but even after that trial, people still believe that OJ was guilty. OJ did some things that were really questionable. Like, you don't write a book called If I Did It, things like that. And there was also the fact that there was evidence of physical abuse towards Nicole Simpson, where she had actually reported incidents to the police. But from what I read and understand, it seemed like the police were also friendly with OJ. So you think back to what could have been different, right? You just really don't know. But I think that OJ's behavior is what made people question whether or not he really was innocent or not.
OJ was immediately not a suspect, but he was definitely looked into, especially because he went missing. And there was a slow speed pursuit in Los Angeles looking for him. And my parents were able to find him. He was this really surreal moment where he was driven down the LA freeway in a white Bronco with his friend Al Cowling. The freeway was completely clear. The Los Angeles freeways are never cleared off. And there was this white Bronco leading a fleet of cop cars slowly behind him as Al Cowlings was on the phone with the cops. And I think then at one point, even a news broadcast saying that OJ had a gun to his head and was going to kill himself. He had visited the grave site of Nicole Brown Simpson, and then he was going who knows where at that time. The whole city was glued to the television. It ended up stopping at his house. And from there, it was the trial of I would say it's a cliche, but it's true, the trial of the century, where not only
Yeah, it was really the trial of the century. And one thing I want you guys to think about is like, imagine if we would have been able to see like the Epstein trial, like on national television every day when you got home from work or when you got home from school. Like it was all the news, like literally at that point in time. And, I didn't grow up with OJ Simpson when he was a football player, but a lot of people did. And they were just like, the juice is on the loose. I remember those stories that the juice is running. I remember the infamous Time magazine cover where there were two different magazines where there was a picture of OJ Simpson where the light was shining on his face. It was his mugshot. And then there was another magazine where they actually had darkened his face to make him look more sinister. I remember that was controversial at that point in time. But one of the things I always wondered was, what about the children? What about OJ Simpson's kids? And even after this trial was over, it's not easy to tell someone that OJ Simpson is your dad, because like I said, a lot of people still believed that he was guilty. And I want to get into just how this trial actually divided the American people as well in just a second, because this is the only trial I remember during my lifetime that caused such a sort of division.
Only the city of Los Angeles and the country, but the world was tuned in to see what would happen to OJ. LA at the time was already deeply divided along racial lines. The LA riots only happened a couple of years earlier. There were deep wounds in the city. I mean, still, pock marks that you could see from the damage the riots left behind in the city. And then this case with OJ comes along, and once again, it seemed to be racially divided whether he did it or whether he did not.
We're going to touch on that part there. So yes, remember, this was not too long after the LA riots, right? And the LA riots were in reference to the Rodney King trial. Remember that? So this actually carried over into the OJ Simpson case, because one of the things that Johnny Cochran, who was also one of OJ's attorneys, actually brought up is the fact that, one of these, these police officers that investigated the scene were actually from Simi Valley. Now, to people that don't live in that area, that doesn't mean as much, but that was also where the police officers that beat Rodney King were from. So there are a lot of police officers that live in that area. So it painted a negative light on the police officer. There was also a history of racism among, I think his name was Furman? Racism among Furman, who was one of the police officers that investigated the incident. And then remember, what was really monumental about this trial was DNA. This was the first time that I remember that DNA evidence actually really was put into the spotlight during a trial. So it was a big deal because they were able to say, well, the DNA didn't fit, the glove didn't fit, you must, acquit. Remember that saying, if the glove don't fit, you must acquit, that kind of thing. But it was very much racially divided, meaning that during that time, a lot of white people in the United States were waiting for that decision and were hoping that OJ was going to be found guilty. A lot of white people thought he was guilty. A lot of black people thought he was innocent. And I still remember sitting in school and my teacher allowing us to listen to the verdict on the radio in class. Now, you probably wouldn't get away with doing that today, but my teacher did that. And I still remember in my dance class, it was divided. All of a sudden, all of us that got along before this trial, once that verdict was read, it was very much divided. All of the white girls in the dance class were very upset, and all the black girls in the dance class were cheering and very happy. So it just goes to show you how this trial really divided the American people. And what was also interesting to me is that so many African Americans were pleading for OJ. A lot of us were hoping like, oh no, like he has to be innocent. You can't arrest him. And a lot of them cheered, right? A lot of black people cheered when OJ was found not guilty. What's interesting about that though, and it was something that I did not know at the time, as much as black Americans were cheering and rooting for OJ, when I looked back on OJ's history, OJ wasn't really cheering and rooting for us. OJ did not consider himself to be black. OJ referred to himself as, I'm not black, I'm OJ. OJ didn't really want much to do with the Black community. And apparently this wasn't a secret, but I just wasn't paying attention at that point in time. We'll get into some of the things that he said. So it's interesting.
His home became such a tourist site that the cops had to block off the street that led to his home in Brentwood because people from around the world would come to see where he lived. It was something that changed the fabric of Los Angeles and certainly made an impact on anybody who grew up in that time.
Yeah. Wow. Katie, you just laid out so much of the story and what people think about when they think of OJ Simpson. For those who are just joining us, our breaking news right this hour is OJ Simpson confirmed to have died at the age of 76. His family saying he succumbed to his battle with cancer. And joining us now by phone is MSNBC entertainment contributor Chris Witherspoon. As we look at these iconic images from his trial, Katie laid out how he had such a fall from grace, having been an NFL football star. Your thoughts learning about his death?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to hear that he died, but I keep thinking about, that trial as Katie was kind of unpacking it, and even the video, the viral video of the Bronco. But OJ really was as big as it gets before the trial happened. He was in several films. He was a bona fide movie. He really crossed over all types of racial lines. So that trial brought up issues that we really hadn't talked about in the mid-90s, like domestic violence, what happens when you're connected to a celebrity. And I think that there are a lot of mixed feelings around that trial coming on the heels.
Yeah, there were a lot of mixed feelings. And I think that, it's hard to say this today because we're in a different time. It's 2024. We also have social media. Could you imagine what it would have been like during the OJ Simpson trial if we had social media during that time? I mean, again, pretty much the trial of the century. But the point that he mentioned in reference to domestic violence, like, people do have to understand that was not talked about as much during that time. And this case kind of put a spotlight on that as well. But it was just really interesting just how this trial in particular divided Americans. I still remember seeing people on television where they showed a crowd of white people, a crowd of Black people, and the crowd of Black people would cheer when the verdict was read, and the crowd of white people would be upset. I remember seeing people crying, on TV after this verdict was read. And this was interesting. This was something that was mentioned during the Huffington Post about OJ Simpson. It said OJ Simpson didn't want to be associated with Black America. Then he came to symbolize it. So it just goes to show you, how things changed, because it says here, this part here, he overheard a white woman at the table saying, "Look, there's OJ sitting with all those ends," right? I remember in my naivete saying to OJ, "Gee, wow, that must have been terrible for you." And he said, "No, it was great. Don't you understand? She knew I wasn't Black. She saw me as OJ." OJ Made in America, a 5-part documentary on the rise and fall of Simpson that premiered Saturday on ABC and continues on ESPN throughout the week, is filled with anecdotes and sentiments similar to those stories and quotes that paint Simpson as a man who at best didn't want to be defined by factors beyond his control, and at worst was a Black man who didn't empathize with less fortunate people who looked like him. This is one of the most infamous statements, I think. We hear from former SWAT officer Pete, who recalls Simpson asking, "What are all these ends doing in Brentwood?" after his famous car chase on June 17th, 1994. So it's really interesting when you dive into how OJ actually felt about his own people, considering that it was Black America that was cheering for OJ, pleading for OJ, and rooting for OJ. Of course, after the trial, OJ did make some changes, right? He started to seek out more support from the Black community. He had pretty much been pushed out of some of those elite, cushy circles that he was once a part of before, because people were like, "I don't feel comfortable associating with OJ Simpson." And then that brings me to the question about the kids. You ever wonder what happened to OJ Simpson's kids? You ever wonder, like, how was their life like after all this was said and done? They lost their mother. Their father was found not guilty, but people still said he was guilty. So it's like, how did that affect and impact their life? It makes you wonder. But OJ Simpson has passed away from cancer. So I did want to make sure I touched on that. Let's go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Nas. Sabrina, I am also disappointed in Matt T not being outspoken on the genocide in Gaza. Everyone should be speaking out against it, especially journalists, no matter how uncomfortable it is. I think it's your duty to do so. I feel you, Nas. I feel you. I mean, I can't speak for him. You know, he told you guys how he felt. I feel you. Jacqueline says, I remember that famous car chase more than I remember the trial. Peter says, I beat cancer twice and it made me stronger. I'm running 15 miles on the treadmill and lifting heavy weights. Shout out to you, Peter. Shout out and kudos to you. Anne says, why did he get acquitted? Because the glove did not fit. Do you remember this, Anne? Actually, Anne, I don't know how old you are, Anne, but that was the thing they were able to prove. Number one, DNA evidence. And number two, the glove that they actually had OJ Simpson try on didn't fit his hand. So they said that there was no way he could have done it. And they were saying that that was the glove that was used to commit the crime. And there was DNA evidence actually, I guess, gathered from that glove. So it was because of the glove. Marvin says OJ lost in his civil case. That is true. He did. Danny says Nicole Brown's family took the kids. And thank you for this super chat, Nas. As far as the attention this trial received, it was similar to Johnny Depp's trial. Me and my colleagues watched the entire trial at work. Interesting. I think the OJ trial might have been bigger, though. And thank you for the super sticker, New Beginning. Thank you so much. Yeah. Considering the fact that we didn't have social media during that time and that trial received as much attention as it did, makes you think. Okay. All right. Go ahead and smash that like button, guys. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. Let's move on to the Nancy Pelosi story here. Am I going to Nancy Pelosi? No, we're going to Joe Biden. Let's move on to the Joe Biden story. I don't know if you guys have heard, but Joe Biden apparently has announced that he is trying to pass a new student debt cancellation resolution. Now, of course, it is election year. So you know what this is really all about, because I want to tell you, if he wanted to do this, he could have done this from the very beginning when he released the first student debt resolution, right? So he could have done it back then. So just keep that in mind, guys. It is election year. Also, I believe Joe Biden is doing this because remember, those polls are showing you he has lost support among younger voters. So I believe he's trying to implement more student debt cancellation to win over that youth vote that he has been losing since the war in Gaza. But I don't know if this is going to work. Let's first get into this statement from Nancy Pelosi. I just want to take you back to a oldie but goodie from 2022 of Nancy Pelosi telling you that the president actually cannot do this. Do you guys remember this? Remember that?
People think that the president of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Well, you'll let me know. People think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. People think that the president of the United States, is this more on the subject than you ever want to know? Well, you'll let me know. People think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. People think that the president...
That didn't age well, right? Okay. Because here's the thing. In the very beginning, when this was announced, I told you that he could cancel all student loan debt by executive order, and he can do it through the Higher Education Act of 1965. I made that very clear to people during that time. Joe Biden deciding to try to do this through the HEROES Act was just a terrible idea. And then also one of the complaints that I had in reference to canceling student loan debt was that he decided to means test it, which I feel made things more complicated. People had difficulty getting through some of the different types of paperwork, the forms, etc. Puts more work on people that had to process those forms when he could have just did a blanket cancellation of all of it. And here we are again. Inflation is starting to increase again. I don't know if everyone's heard about that. So now he's trying to present another form of student debt cancellation, which is also means tested. Let's go ahead and get into this speech from President Biden trying to win over younger voters. Here comes Joe.
From day one, my administration has been committed to fixing the broken student loan system and making sure higher education is a ticket to the middle class, not a barrier. My administration has approved debt cancellation for 4 million Americans through various actions. And today, I'm announcing new plans that would cancel student debt for millions more. In total, these plans would cancel some or all student debt for 30 million Americans when combined with everything we've done so far. To find out how these plans may impact you, visit studentaid.gov.
Okay, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to visit it because I want you to see what this plan actually looks like. So let's go ahead and bring this up on the screen here. This is from Federal Student Aid, studentaid.gov, federal student loan debt relief, because I want you guys to understand what they're trying to change here. All right. So again, they decided to means test this, which I told you before, I think this is a mistake. President Biden announced new plans to cancel student debt under the Higher Education Act. If implemented as proposed, these plans would authorize waivers to, so here's the means test, cancel up to $20,000 in interest for all borrowers who have accrued or capitalized interest on their loans since entering repayment. Okay. Cancel up to. So I have trouble with the wording because what does that really mean? Because some people are going to see this and they're going to think, oh, I'm going to get $20,000 of my student loan interest canceled. No, 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 no. It says up to. So what is the deciding factor in reference to how much of that interest is going to be canceled for you? For you, it could be $5,000. For someone else, it could be $10,000. For another person, it could be $20,000. This is why I don't like to means test canceling some type of debt. So hold on to that piece where it says up to. Now we'll go to the next one. Automatically cancel debt for borrowers who would otherwise be eligible for loan forgiveness under income-driven repayment plans like the SAVE plan or the public service loan forgiveness, but are not enrolled in those programs. So pay attention to this piece where it says not enrolled in those programs, because again, some people are just going to read that first part and they're like, oh, I qualified for the public service loan forgiveness. I've been a part of that for a couple of years. In fact, one of my friends is a part of that, right? But this doesn't apply to them because they're already a part of that program. They already entered that program. This is for people who would qualify for it, but they're not enrolled in those programs. Someone explain that to me, right? Look at this part again. Automatically cancel debt for borrowers. How much debt? All of it? Are they talking about canceling all of it for people who are eligible for the SAVE plan and for the public service loan forgiveness plan? We need to ask these questions, guys. Okay. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. I'm not trying to be a thorn in your side. I'm just trying to ask the questions that I think were not asked by some people last time. So we got to dig a little bit deeper. Here's the next one. Cancel student debt for borrowers with undergraduate loans who entered repayment at least 20 years ago, and debt for graduate school borrowers who entered repayment at least 25 years ago. So let's pay attention to the timeline. 20 years for undergrad, 25 years for grad. So why those years? Why 20 years and why 25 years? Because think about it just for a second. If you are a younger millennial, that's not you, because you haven't been out of college for 20 years or 25 years. Who's been out of college for 20 years or 25 years? Let's do some math. Maybe older millennial, Gen X, boomer. We got to ask these questions. I'm sorry. It's just, I saw people getting excited about this and I'm like, let me read this carefully. Okay. Why those years? Why not just do that for everybody? And then also this part right here, cancel student debt. Again, how much debt? All of it? So guys, we got to ask these questions. Is Joe Biden saying he's going to cancel all of the student debt for those people? And also, if you have entered repayment 20 years ago or 25 years ago, most of your student loan debt is probably almost paid off. So how much are they really canceling? Come on, guys. Come on. Let's go to the next one here. Fired Play says this reads like a credit card application. Yeah, look, man. The next one here, cancel student debt for borrowers who previously enrolled in low financial value programs. According to who? So you see, they are deciding what those low financial value programs are. You might think or consider that your program was, but they're making the decision. We'll get into that in just a second when we scroll down. And then this part here, this is the last one. Cancel student debt for borrowers experiencing hardship in their lives that prevent them from fully paying back their loans now or in the future. Define hardship, because you can actually apply for a deferment if you're going through, economic hardship, or if you had some people have a medical hardship, so they're not able to work. So they got to, apply for some type of deferment during that time. But again, most of us, I think, have going through some type of hardship, financial hardship. That's a lot of people, considering inflation, considering people lost their businesses, small businesses during the pandemic. That's a lot of people going through a hardship. So let's dig a little bit deeper. This is why I want us to be very careful. Okay. Would I qualify? So let's look at the first one. Cancel up to $20,000 in interest. All borrowers would be eligible for this debt cancellation. Low and middle income borrowers enrolled in the SAVE plan or other income-driven repayment plans would be eligible for their entire interest balance since entering repayment to be canceled if they make $120,000 or less. This is why you have to read the fine print. Now, you can make $120,000, but if you live in New York City or you live in San Francisco, you're not really making what you think. That's why I don't like means testing it. Goes on to say here, or less per year individually as an individual, or if you're married and you're filing separately, $180,000 or less per year as a head of household, or $240,000 or less per year as married borrowers who file joint taxes. Again, who came up with these numbers, right? Let's go to the next one, where it says automatically cancel debt for borrowers who would otherwise be eligible for the income-driven repayment and the SAVE plan and the public service loan forgiveness. The U.S. Department of Education would use data it has available to identify borrowers enrolled in SAVE who have been in repayment for at least 10 years or more and took out small balance loans. So you see why you got small balance of loans. This is tricky and confusing because it says borrowers who would be eligible but are not enrolled. But then it also says here, borrowers enrolled in SAVE who have been in repayment for at least 10 years or more and took out small balance of loans. So you see, guys, this is why I didn't think they were trying to cancel all of it. It looks like they're looking for a certain segment of the population that doesn't have as much debt left. Cancel student debt for borrowers who entered repayment a long time ago. And that goes to the 20 years for undergrad and 25 years for grad school for those who entered repayment then. Again, that's a certain segment of the population. That's obviously not Gen Z. That may be some older millennials, but that's definitely not Gen Z. Cancel student debt for borrowers previously enrolled in low financial value. Let's dive into this. Borrowers who took out loans associated with institutions or programs that lost their eligibility to participate in the federal student aid program or were denied recertification would be eligible for relief. That's not as many people as you think. Because there are other institutions that I would consider to be a low financial value institution, but they don't fall under that category. This is why you have to read the details. It goes on to say borrowers who attended institutions or programs that closed and failed to provide sufficient financial value would also be eligible for relief. So let's think about people that have attended schools like the University of Phoenix, which is a ripoff, by the way. That provides, I would say that is a low financial value school with low financial value programs. They overcharge. They get these students into a lot of debt. They started out going after, single moms, right? Single parents that don't have time to necessarily commute back and forth to school. So that way they can do it online or in the evening if that works out. But that wouldn't fall under this requirement because they didn't close. So you see how they defined what is low financial value? Financial value will be measured upon indicators like excessive student loan default rates or unaffordable debt burdens relative to income. This one is going to be tricky. That one's good. And that's a lot of paperwork. And by the way, this does not go into effect this year. This goes into effect in 2025. So you see how they do a gotcha? In order for this to pass, you have to vote for Joe Biden. First, it's got to pass in Congress. But if it passed in the House, then it goes to the Senate. I don't know if this will pass in the Senate, just being honest, probably not. But if it did pass in the Senate, then Joe Biden says that he would approve it. But the only way that you actually get this is if you vote for Joe Biden in November, because this doesn't start until 2025. Yes, XJW. Bennett College scammed me and lost their accreditation the next month. Yeah. So a lot of people, I'm familiar with Bennett. So do you see the game? You see what he's trying to do? And then the last one here, cancel student debt for borrowers experiencing hardship in their lives that prevent them from paying their loans now or in the future. A little bit of detail. Borrowers predicted to fall into default on their student loans would be eligible for automatic relief under the Biden administrative proposal. Borrowers experiencing other cost burdens could also receive relief through an application process. What other cost burdens? Notice they don't go into detail. You're going to have to fill out the application to see if you qualify for whatever these other cost burdens may be. Then you got to wait for them to respond. The other thing, borrowers that are about to fall into default would be eligible for automatic relief. What does that mean? For all of it? Or for a certain portion? I saw people getting hyped up and excited about this on social media. And it was very obvious to me they didn't read the fine lines. They didn't go into the details because I'm like, no, this does not apply to everybody. Now, what could have been an easier way to do this? Just canceling all of it for everybody. No means testing. That would have been much easier. But no, you got it. All these different tests. I'm like, are you applying to get a portion of your student debt canceled? Or are you applying to take out a loan on a house? Are you applying for a mortgage? Are you applying for it to get part of your student debt canceled? Yeah. Jacqueline says, always read the fine print. Always. This is why it's important to read that. Now, I want to show you just proof as to why I think he's doing this, because he is losing young voter support. So this article here from Politico says the polls are suggesting a huge shift in the electorate. Are they right? Check this out. Something weird is happening beneath the overall stability of the early 2024 polling, and it's either a sign of massive electoral realignment or that the polls are wrong again. Polls show former President Donald Trump is ascendant with the youngest block of the electorate, even leading Joe Biden in some surveys as less engaged young voters spurn Biden. Biden is stronger with seniors than he was 4 years ago, even as his personal image is significantly diminished since he was elected last time. Let's look at the numbers. Make sure I didn't skip over. Yeah. Where did I go? I'm sorry, guys. Generational shift. That would be a generational shift. For decades, Democratic presidential candidates have overwhelmingly won young voters, and Republicans have done the same with the other end of the electorate. Poll after poll is showing that's flipped this year. Let's dive in here. It goes on to say, or maybe something's wrong in the polls, and the mirage of an age inversion is really a warning sign of a structural problem in the 2024 polling. Okay. Here's what the polls show. Last week, a new NPR PBS NewsHour Marist College national poll showed Trump 2 points ahead of Biden among millennial and Gen Z voters, while Biden led overall among voters 45 years and older. So Biden is capturing 45 years and over. He's capturing that base. But Trump is now leading him among millennials and Gen Z. It goes a little bit further here. A Fox News poll last month showed Trump leading Biden among voters under 30 by a whopping 18 points in a head-to-head matchup, and by 21 points with independent and third-party candidates included. Did you hear that part? When you include the independent and third-party candidates, he's actually beating Biden by 21 points with voters under 30 years old. So part of this has to do with Joe Biden's decision to continue to support and fund the state of Israel during this war in Gaza. The younger voters are not doing this. They do not want to support Joe Biden because they know that without his support, without the funding from the U.S. government, Israel wouldn't have all these arms and these weapons to continue their assault on the Palestinian people. So what does the Biden administration do? Do they stop giving arms to Israel? No. They decide, let's try to cancel more student loan debt to get those voters back. Do you guys think that this is going to work? Do you think younger voters are going to fall for this? Or do you think they're going to realize that they're being played? I sincerely hope they don't fall for this. I really do. Because what I would say to you again is that at the end of the day, if he wanted to do this, he could have done this the first time when he decided to implement student debt cancellation. He waited, and he's doing it now because this is the election year. This is the game that they play. Welcome to America. Let's go to some of the comments here in the chat. Colin says, another bait and switch. There you go. Thank you for the super chat, Edward. This bill sounds like it wouldn't help anyone and it wouldn't pass anyway, just like the do nothing Democrats intended. I'm still voting third party. I hear you, Edward. Ashura says Biden doesn't excite anyone and no one wants it. Troy says, I don't know anyone who is voting for Biden. I don't either, actually, now I think about that. Thank you for the super chat, Troy. Biden dangling the carrots. Thank you, John. The Democrats are always too little too late. Yeah, I told you again, they are reactive, not proactive. Papa says, Sabby Sabs, you are teaching people not to be played by our corrupt politicians. So thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to wake people up to some things because he's making generalizations and it's important we see the details. Thank you for the super chat, Colin. Imani Oakley once said that a bill is good when it is able to answer all of your questions. 100% well said there, Colin. Yeah, buddy. This is Joe Biden's way of trying to win back the younger voters. So here we are. All right, guys, go ahead and like the stream. We can do a like check really quick. Or Eric, if you can do a like check. I never know. And thank you for liking the stream. All right. And that brings me to Nancy Pelosi in reference to Israel and Gaza. Something strange happened. Something is rotten in Denmark. Because believe it or not, apparently there have been a coalition of politicians in DC that have actually been pushing to pause aid to Israel. And I use that word pause because this is not something that they want to last indefinitely. This is just for a certain period of time. So just keep that in mind. And one of those people that actually signed that letter, believe it or not, is Nancy Pelosi. I kid you not. Let's dive in to this clip here. Shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. You're out here doing the damn thing. Here we go.
Yeah. President Biden had a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu last week. He expressed real unhappiness with how the war is being conducted in Gaza. I know a number of Democrats have done the same, particularly after that strike that killed those humanitarian workers. The Prime Minister yesterday said, look, I'm setting a date for a Rafah invasion. That's still going to go ahead. He didn't say when that would be. You are among those who have said aid to Israel, military aid to Israel should be conditioned. Explain to us what you mean, what conditions and why.
Well, let me be very specific. The letter was about the attack on the
aid workers.
The workers. It's
pause. Everybody pay attention to what she just said. And there's a reason why she said that. Nancy Pelosi also supports AIPAC. There's videos of her at AIPAC conventions. So what she is doing there is Nancy Pelosi is making it very clear that she's calling for a pause of funding Israel, not because of the assault on the Palestinians in Gaza, but because of those humanitarian aid workers that were killed. So do you see how she's making that distinction? And that's to make sure that Nancy Pelosi gets to continue her relationship with the Israeli lobby. So she's trying to have it both ways. I told you Bernie Sanders is doing this song and dance too. They're trying to have it both ways. So they're not going to come out and say, we are no longer supporting the state of Israel. She still supports the state of Israel. She just wants some type of accountability for a short period of time because of the humanitarian aid workers. And again, what this shows you is that when we talk about prioritizing certain people, once again, Israelis and now the humanitarian aid workers are prioritized over the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are never prioritized by the U.S. government. They're never put first. Nancy thinks she's slick.
Said until there is an investigation. And they said they were doing an investigation. Now, I think the investigation should be an independent one. And I said that early on, and Secretary Blinken said that, Jose Andres said that. It should be an independent one. But nonetheless, that letter said and there should be an investigation. It didn't enlarge the issue to everything else. Now, you have to know that we have the Leahy language in the law, which says that if we give you assistance, as we do give to Israel, you cannot interfere with our giving humanitarian assistance. So there's some conversation that will be had about this in the Senate and in the House. It's really such a tragedy. Look, October 7th was barbaric. It was horrible what they did to the Israeli people and the rest. Hamas is a terrorist organization. We need.
See how she has to come in and say that again? That's her proving her point that she still supports the state of Israel. Yes, I signed that letter, but that letter was in reference to the humanitarian aid workers, not in reference to the Palestinians. It's so brutal. Notice they use the words brutal. So brutal what happened on October 7th to the Israelis. But it's not brutal what's been happening to the Palestinian people over the years. I don't know if she had a drink before this interview either.
Need to free the hostages, all of the hostages. But nearly 33,000 people dying, people starving, hydration, famine, and the rest. There has to be a better way.
Mika?
And so, Madam Speaker, on that note, what are some of the opportunities or options for President Biden in terms of trying to forge a better path here? It seems Bibi Netanyahu is really dug in on a number of things. Do you think that conditions on aid should be put in place? And if they are put in place, what would they be?
Well, I've not been a fan of having conditions on aid to Israel. We give Israel the aid we give them because it's in our national security issue.
You guys hear this? Let's go back just a little bit. Watch how nervous she gets when she brings up the idea of conditioning aid.
If they are put in place, what would they be?
Well, I've not been a fan of having conditions on aid to Israel. We give Israel the aid we give them because it's in our national security issue interest to do so, and that has been our tradition. But I do.
Pause. You give Israel the aid that you give them because you're bought. It's not even about national security interests. It's because you guys, all of you guys have been bought by the Israeli lobby. Even if you didn't take money from them as a part of your campaign, you went into parties that did. Democratic Party and the Republican Party. That's why you give Israel that money, because of organizations like AIPAC, because of organizations like J Street, not necessarily no national security interests. You guys are bought and paid for. Of course, she's not going to say that on national television. And of course, Mika from Morning Joe is not going to push back on her using the rhetoric that I just did. If she were going to do that, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't be sitting there in the first place.
The president has not said if they cross the red line in Rafah what he would do. But I'll tell you what he has been doing. And people should know this, and especially try to say this to all the people in front of my house in the middle of the night and the rest. The president has been advocating for humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians. The Republicans in the House of Representatives have held it up.
Pause. You guys see how she pulls out this old trick in the playbook? The people who are protesting outside your house, Nancy Pelosi, the people that you called like Putin puppets, those people are calling for a permanent ceasefire and self-determination for the Palestinian people. Nancy is trying to make this just about humanitarian aid. Those people are asking for you to stop the slaughter of the Palestinian people and to stop giving Israel the weapons that allow them to do so. But she just brings it back to the humanitarian aid so that way she can point and blame the Republicans for that not passing. What does that have to do with the Israeli government preventing the aid that was already being brought in from getting to the Palestinian people in the first place? And we'll bring up the Flower Massacre investigation that has been debunked recently by CNN. CNN did their own investigation and found that Israel has lied. Surprise, surprise. So the Republicans have nothing to do with the fact that Israel was not allowing the humanitarian aid to get into Gaza to the Palestinian people, that Israelis were blocking off the roads, preventing the trucks from getting in, that IDF soldiers were taking aid off the trucks and setting it on fire and videotaping themselves doing it. That has nothing to do with the Republican Party. But this is all they know how to do, is to continue to play partisan politics. She got to blame someone instead of blaming Joe Biden and blaming her damn self. So they point to the other party. This is the problem with partisan politics.
And yet, to hear these people go out there and say, oh, genocide, Joe, all that, not to repeat what they said, but nonetheless, he's the one who's been advocating for it. The House of Representatives has held that up, as you know. But in addition to that, one of the plans that they put forth to give aid to Ukraine has no humanitarian assistance.
We don't need to bring Ukraine into this subject. Okay? You've given billions to Ukraine. Leave Zelensky and Ukraine out of this conversation. We are talking about what is happening to the Palestinian people right now. I don't think it's fair to make that same comparison. They are not in the same situation. We're talking about people that have been historically oppressed and occupied. We're talking about people that have been treated like animals, while the government that is treating them this way, they're living just fine in Israel. Everybody's got health care, free college education, things we don't even have in our own damn country. We're talking about a group, a state that is in power over those people who have no power. The Israeli government has a military. The Palestinian people don't have a military. And so when people say, oh, well, Hamas is terrorist, so dangerous, and da-da-da, they have no military. Without the occupation, without the oppression, without the sense of, dignity, you don't end up with Hamas. So I don't know what is happening here with Nancy Pelosi, but honey, nobody is buying your lies. It is very obvious. We know what is happening and we know who's making the damn decisions. And yes, we do call him Genocide Joe because he sends the money. He sends the weapons. It's blood on his hands. And I know, Nancy, it's your job to defend him and stand up for him so that you can keep your seat. We got to start asking questions. Why hasn't Nancy Pelosi gone ahead and retired? Saving that seat and keeping it warm for your daughter. So you got to go on all these different news stations and defend senile Genocide Joe. And then you're upset because people are protesting outside your house. Forget your house. People should have been protesting outside your house, Nancy, while your district has all these homeless people out on the damn street and you got a nice old fancy house.
So there has to be some recognition of what is holding up this assistance to the Palestinians, because humanity, as Jose keeps saying, we've got to support humanity in all of this. So I can't really answer that except to say what our law is, that if we give you assistance, you cannot interfere with our giving humanitarian assistance for the same geographic area. I would hope that Netanyahu, he's only interested in his own political survival. Does that sound familiar? And that's just the way it's been. It's a tragedy. Netanyahu is a tragedy. We all love Israel. We want Israel to be able to defend itself.
See, there it is. Let me continue to kiss up to the state of Israel because I gotta still have that support from AIPAC. I can't let them down.
But also to maintain its the respect it commands in the world. I don't think he's in furtherance of that. I think that Chuck Schumer was right when he said there should be an election.
So people are still protesting against Nancy Pelosi. We got to give a shout out to students at Arizona State University. There was actually a talk by Nancy Pelosi, and she was there. And of course, she was met with protest.
Nancy Pelosi, you are complicit in genocide. The blood of over 15,000 Palestinian babies is on your hands. How can you be a Democrat and say you hold democratic values while over 100,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been massacred with bombs that you paid for? We will not be shamed into voting for you or Genocide Joe and your massacreist policies. My family back home in Palestine is being killed. Their blood is on your hands. And David Axelrod, shame on you and every one of the Democratic elites that want to shame us for voting for Genocide Joe. 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire. Shame on you! Shame on you! Nancy Pelosi, you are complicit in genocide. The blood of over 15,000 Palestinian babies is on your hands. How can you be a Democrat and say you hold democratic values while over 100,000 innocent Palestinian civilians have been massacred with bombs that you paid for? We will not be shamed into voting.
So here's Nancy Pelosi here. And the guy sitting next to her, I wanted to pause this because I wanted you to see that's David Axelrod. Remember, he was one of Obama's advisors. So here we have like the hoity-toity elite club, the club of the elite, Miss Ice Cream Freezer herself, Nancy Pelosi, and David Axelrod. And these people have been making decisions that have put that gentleman who stood up to speak, he's also Palestinian, that have put his family in jeopardy and at risk. These people, they have every right to be interrupted. They have every right to be confronted because they're the ones that are voting on the legislation that allows these things to pass and happen in the first damn place. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi can go back home to her fridge or her freezer of ice cream. So they have to drag him out, you know?
For you or Genocide Joe and your massacreist policies, my family back home in Palestine is being killed. Their blood is on your hands. And David Axelrod, shame on you and every one of the Democratic elites that want to shame us for voting for Genocide Joe. 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire. Shame on you. Shame on you. Nancy.
And I'm sorry, but, you know, again, he has every right to say what he said, because the thing is this. Politicians have to be held accountable. They're not just owed their seat. See, part of the problem is people like Nancy Pelosi, they've been in these seats for so damn long. They're not used to being confronted. They're not used to being challenged. They're not used to people coming up to them and ask them to do their damn job the right way. They became comfortable. And this is why I always continue to say that these politicians are not going to save you. We all have to come to a clear understanding about this. Once these people get in there, going into these two parties, the parties are already owned. They're already corporate. They're already controlled. You think you'll be the one to go in there and make a change, but they're going to hush you up or they're going to kick you out if you don't go with the flow. Nancy Pelosi realized that a long time ago, and she decided to go with the flow. She looks like an absolute clown having to get up there and defend Joe Biden, who can barely talk himself, against people calling him Genocide Joe. Well, that's what you are. That's what he is. That's Joe Biden's legacy. Joe Biden's legacy is Crime Bill Joe. I don't want my kids to grow up in a racial jungle, telling Anita Hill to be quiet and not allowing her witnesses to testify. Calling Obama, he's well-spoken and clean. And now genocide. That's his legacy. And honestly, if the Democratic Party should be absolutely embarrassed, they should be embarrassed. How do you go from Donald Trump's presidency, which a lot of people were pissed about? How do you go from that to Democrat politicians being called out, called Genocide Joe and all these things? How do you get worse than that? We can go to the next set when you're ready, Eric. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. There's just no excuse. There's no excuse for this, because what these two presidential terms have shown people is this. Every time you say, we'll switch over to the next party and it'll be better. And what these two have shown you is that actually both of these parties are corporate and corrupt. Let's go to some of the comments here. Thank you for the super chat, Ed. Don't pause aid. Stop all aid permanently. We should demand Israel pay us taxpayers all the aid back. Well said, Edward. Thank you, sir. Bikes a lot day. Chris Hedges said that the World Central Kitchen is there to replace the UN Relief Organization. Yeah, Chris Hedges will be here Sunday. That is one of the things I wanted to talk to him about as well. Thank you, Troy. These people's souls are in big trouble. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And thank you, JoJo. Love you, Sabs. When I graduate from stenography school this year, I'd love to offer a live closed caption of your shows. Hashtag free Palestine. Interesting. You'll have to email me about that. All right. Thanks for hitting the like. And let's go on to our next story. Oh, buddy. Vice presidents. Who knew there would be so much drama or turmoil around vice presidential picks for the independent candidates? Who knew it would get this much attention? But here we are. Because something interesting has happened this week with independent candidates RFK Jr. and Dr. Cornel West. It seems like now their vice president picks, their running mates here, are getting a lot of attention, more than you would expect for someone that's running independent, right? You expect that to happen more so if you're running in the Democrat or Republican Party, but no. They're both running as independents, and there's been a lot of buzz around RFK Jr.'s running mate. We've discussed that. And now there is buzz about Cornel West running mate, who he just announced. It appears he has chosen academic Melina Abdullah. Now, he talked about this on News Nation. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to dive into why people are freaking out about Dr. West's pick and her involvement with Black Lives Matter. And then we're going to go into this crazy firestorm that has happened with Ro Khanna and Nicole Shanahan. Let's go ahead and dive into this clip here from News Nation. I will also say I don't think this was the best headline to have on this segment. It says at least 2 people shot in West Philly. I guess they were wrapping up something, but they didn't pull that away fast enough. Let's dive in here.
Dr. Cornel West now, of course, is running for president as an independent candidate and actually made a big announcement today as a running mate, which we'll talk about in a moment. It's always good to have you on the program. I know you've spent a lot of time in your life and work in Philadelphia and in this area. Reaction to what we're hearing in the breaking news here today at this Ramadan event. 2 people shot at least.
Yeah, I tell you, my brother, it's always a blessing to talk with you, though. But no, this is a holy day for our precious Muslims, Muslim brothers and sisters of all colors. And I've been to Philly. I was just at a bookstore, mosque, and a church in Philly just a few weeks ago. And we got to find out exactly what's going on and just hope and pray that not that many people are hurt or injured. You know, my mind is still very much on Dexter Reed. Remember Dexter Reed in Chicago, 96 bullets coming at him within a matter of minutes in Chicago just recently. And this is the police shooting this brother in his car. And whoever it is, police, civilians, or whatever, we've got to make sure that we have commitment to fairness, commitment to justice. And let's just not lose sight of the humanity of anybody in these very, very grim and dim times, my brother. That's what I'm concerned about. No, we don't want to, and we won't. We'll continue to follow it. Again, we don't have a ton of information to go on now. We know 2 people are shot. We'll talk and get.
Yeah, those police shooting stories. I'll have to, there's another one I need to cover. I'll cover those on Sunday. I won't be able to show the video because YouTube flips out now if you show police, like the police brutality videos, but I'll be able to read the article. Let me just speed up a little bit here because okay, there we go.
Movement, right? Tell me more about this. I know you need a running mate to get on those state ballots, but tell me about your pick. Well, I'm just so deeply blessed. It's with really great joy that I announced her being vice presidential candidate of my independent run for presidency. Why? Because she's one of the great love warriors and freedom fighters of her generation. She's a professor, she's an intellectual, but most importantly, she has a deep love, care, and concern for the people, meaning poor and working people, again, of all colors. But she, like me, we begin on the chocolate side, which is to say we begin in our own families, communities, our own networks of relations. And then, of course, the love and justice spills over for everyone. And so.
Okay, let's go back and look at her. Her name is Melina Abdullah. Who is Dr. Melina Abdullah? Cornell West VP running mate, professor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State, LA, Black Lives Matter organizer. We're going to get to this piece because this is the problem that I've seen people flip out over on social media. Womanist, scholar, activist, co-host, and co-producer of radio program Beautiful Struggle, won numerous awards for racial justice, mental health, and more. So let's fast forward a little bit here. There we go.
Very blessed to work alongside her. And she's brilliant. She's visionary. She's courageous. She's been to jail many, many, many times. And that's always a sign because
you're up too, right?
Oh my God, yes. But you see, for me and for her, we're trying to put a smile on the faces of Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Rabbi Eshel, Edward Said, Dorothy Day. They're the ones who set the highest moral and spiritual standards. And I know you come out of that rich Irish tradition. You've got some standards, my brother, moral and spiritual standards. So when we talk about politics, let's try to get beyond the lies, the revenge, and the greed, and the hatred. Let's talk about truth, justice, and love.
We're trying truth, justice, and love. That works, sir.
Okay. Now, so her name is Melina Abdullah. Dr. West actually announced that she is going to be his running mate on Tavis Smiley's radio show. So that's where the announcement was made. Now, ideologically, I would say that they are very much aligned. If you look at Dr. West's platform for his presidential campaign, you can see there's a lot of overlap there. So it's not like he chose someone where they don't align politically and they don't align on the issues. She's a professor. She's also an activist. But here's the issue that people have raised. It's the Black Lives Matter organization issue. And you guys know I've had people on the show multiple times before to talk about BLM. Now there's BLM grassroots, and then there's BLM, the actual, organization that made a lot of money. You guys have heard about that before. But apparently she just had a lawsuit. So this is where people are raising their eyebrows. It says woman who sued BLM leader is Cornell West vice president. And we're going to dive in here. It says Abdullah is a co-founder of the LA chapter of BLM movement and a professor at Cal State University, LA. West made the announcement during the Tavis Smiley show, etc. It goes on to say here, in 2022, Abdullah sued Shamala Bowers, an executive of Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, accusing him of siphoning more than $10 million from donors to pay his consulting firm and using the nonprofit as his personal piggy bank. BLM Global Network was described in the lawsuit as an extension of the grassroots organization. Bowers denied the claims as harmful, divisive, and false. So this is some of the issue that people have. Remember, I told you there's BLM grassroots and then there's BLM, that global network. It goes on to say, here's the troubling part. The suit was dismissed in June of 2023, and Abdullah was ordered to pay Bowers over $100,000 in legal fees by the LA Superior Court judge last month. So if she was ordered to actually pay the person that she sued, typically, just from what I know, typically that means that, number one, the court didn't find any wrongdoing in Bowers' situation, but then also they're holding Melina Abdullah accountable. That's why she has to pay him. Typically, that's how that would work. You have to end up paying the person that you sued. So that's the problem. This is what people were sharing on social media. This is the problem that some people had. They were like, why would he choose her? Considering, this is fairly recent that it was dismissed in June of 2023. Abdullah addressed the lawsuit during her VP announcement on Wednesday after Smiley asked if her affiliation with BLM movement carried baggage to the West presidential campaign. So that's Tavis Smiley letting them know that this may be an issue because you just had this lawsuit dismissed and you're ordered to pay the person you were suing, dismissed in 2023. And now you were selected as Dr. West's running mate. So that's why Tavis Smiley is asking that question. Because obviously this raises eyebrows for people. So people, as soon as this was announced, this is what people were sharing. So it goes on to say here, there's one lawsuit or was one lawsuit. Black Lives Matter Grassroots, which is the boots on the ground, my side of things. We had our resources and platforms stolen by this other entity, which is comprised of highly paid consultants, not organizers. We sued for our resources back. Unfortunately, the lawsuit was blocked by something called an anti-SLAPP motion. SLAPP, also known as Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, are lawsuits that intend to silence critics by hitting them with a costly legal defense. So there are no suits against our side of things. BLM Grassroots is the authentic boots on the ground. It's what we intended to do when we birthed this movement. I think some people might see it as baggage, but I actually see the work and the experience of organizing and the kind of authenticity of our work as being something that actually fuels the campaign. It goes on to say here, BLMGNF celebrated the dismissal of the suit last year, calling Abdullah's lawsuit frivolous and accusing her of blatantly and intentionally lying about Bowers to garner salacious news headlines. So, as I also gave criticism about RFK Jr.'s, pick for a running mate, what did I tell you? I said he picked her because she had a lot of money and she was a donor to Democrats, etc. We had a lot of things to say about Nicole. So with this particular situation, again, I think she aligns with Dr. West in reference to political ideology. I think they share some of the same principles in reference to social justice and activism. But I don't think it may be a good idea to pick someone that this is going to keep being thrown up, that just lost this lawsuit against Black Lives Matter Global Foundation. I personally would have stayed away from anyone that was a part of BLM, because even when you say BLM grassroots, the problem is people still think in their mind of BLM, the global network, the BLM global network that made a lot of money, right? The Cadillac commercials and all that kind of stuff. That's what people think when you say BLM. It's like you have to say BLM grassroots because people just assume, oh, BLM, that organization that raised all that money and got the $5 million house and didn't use any of that money to get people out of jail. a lot of the hardcore Black Lives Matter activists that were on the ground, a lot of those people were never seen from again. There were people that were put into white vans and they were dragged off, and you never saw or heard from those people again. That's what I'm trying to tell you guys. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if that was the best decision, but he probably picked someone that he figured he could trust and someone that fit him, his political ideology as well. But these VPs are getting a lot of attention. Now we move on to Nicole Shanahan. Now, Nicole Shanahan has been a whole nother something itself. Some RFK Jr. supporters have decided to leave RFK Jr.'s campaign because he chose Nicole Shanahan, because they still felt like she was too attached to the Democratic Party because she described herself as a progressive and she's donated to Democrat politicians, right? Well, now Nicole and Ro Khanna are having this type of controversy, which is wild and crazy. Listen to this. So Nicole actually put this on notice. CBS just sent this to me. I have received a letter from Representative Ro Khanna intended for Nicole Shanahan, urging her to step down as RFK's running mate. In the letter, Representative Khanna warned Shanahan that supporting Kennedy could aid Trump's return to the White House and have a negative environmental consequences. So let's pause here for a second. So Ro Khanna has actually started a petition for Nicole to step down from RFK Jr.'s campaign. Ro Khanna actually wants her to help the Democratic Party win re-election in November. I'm going to say this again. You have a congressman who started a petition against a VP running mate who is a part of a political campaign that is independent from both of those parties. And Ro Khanna is asking for people to call for Nicole Shanahan to step down from RFK Jr.'s campaign. I'm not even supporting RFK Jr.'s campaign, but this is whack. And why does Ro Khanna seem to have such a close kinship with Nicole? And you're going to see more about that in just a second. She was a donor to the Democratic Party. Why would Ro Khanna do this? Let's go on. What an embarrassing moment. It goes on to say here, oh, and in reference to have negative environmental consequences, Joe Biden approved the Willow Project. So let's not pretend that Joe Biden has been having positive environmental consequences. There's some things they've done in reference to the environment, but they're still harming it. According to Khanna, Shanahan sought his advice by accepting Kennedy's offer. Look at this. According to Ro Khanna, Shanahan sought his advice by accepting Kennedy's offer. CBS News plans to publish this story tomorrow morning. If you would like to comment, please note that my deadline is this evening. This is my full response to CBS. I want to bring this discussion back to the people because I am beholden to you, the people, and not the corporate press. In my conversation with Ro, he congratulated me on the position and encouraged me to run. We'll see how true that is. Stating that every American has the right to run in this country. He stated that we live in a democracy and that it was wrong for anyone to threaten me against running. Clearly, Ro has changed his stance based on pressure from the party. I hope he understands how anti-democratic it is to ask someone to step down from a race that empowers the American public to make their own decisions. I am very disappointed that he has been pressured into issuing this letter to me publicly. He could have called me privately. He has my direct line. Now, remember, both of them are from that Silicon Valley area. They've probably hung out in person. They live in pretty well-to-do areas. But she said he has her direct line. So that's her letting the cat out the bag to let you know that Ro Khanna has a direct line to a Democrat donor. Direct line. If it's true that he encouraged her to run, it sounds like he encouraged her to run through the Democratic Party, not outside of the party. But here we have a congressman getting all shaky and things. So Ro Khanna issued a response. He's responding to RFK Jr. here. This is cracking me up. So RFK said, "I'm so grateful for your courage and grace, Nicole. I have always admired Ro Khanna. His flip-flop here is disappointing. The party has power to bludgeon men of character into wavering." He responds and says, "RFK, I grew up memorizing speeches your father gave about GDP not being the worth of our society." Why is it whenever people want to bring up RFK or politicians want to bring up, I remember your father. I remember your uncle. Don't know why they feel the need to say that. Goes on to say, although we disagree on the jab, I admire your call for defense cuts and your defense of free speech. But we cannot risk putting Trump back in the White House. Does this feel like democracy to you guys? Does it feel democratic to you that Ro Khanna, a sitting congressman, is putting this petition out to get another running mate who's running outside of both parties to walk away from it? Because he's basically saying this is going to bring us Donald Trump. Joe Biden was losing in the polls before RFK Jr. even stepped into the race, son. Do you feel this is democratic, you guys? I don't feel this is democratic, and I feel like this is overreach. Who is Ro Khanna to tell people what they can and cannot do in reference to running? There is more. So he decided to call out Nicole here. Here's Ro Khanna posting text messages. Nicole has every right to be on the ticket. My point to her, both publicly and privately, has been that RFK's ticket threatens the very issues she cares about, such as climate and abortion rights, and to welcome her into the Democratic Party. Again, I'm no supporter of RFK's campaign, but I thought climate was one of the issues that he was particularly strong on. So it just, now here's Ro Khanna sharing her text message. Again, this is a sitting congressman. Sharon said, Ro is out of place. This is wild, right? This is wild. If anyone's watching, don't text Ro. Look at this. Nicole, thanks for the call and congrats on your selection. I want to be very respectful because I believe everyone has a right to run. But I would hope you might consider joining the Biden efforts at some point to do and push for bold things on regenerative agriculture and climate. Let us keep the lines of communication and dialogue open. Warmly, Ro. Unfortunately, we can't see the date, but we see the time. So this is what's been going on behind the scenes, ladies and gentlemen. You see this? Sneaky. This is why you can't trust either one of these parties. So Nicole responds, Ro Khanna, you have my phone number and could have called instead of going to the press. This is performative. This is slimy. This is really slimy, guys, and cruddy. And this is a good point. Why did Ro Khanna go to the press? Why did he choose to make it public? Why didn't he just call her? Ro Khanna did respond about this. In fact, look at his eyes. Look at his eyes. Once this information was released all over Twitter, Ro Khanna wasted no time jumping onto mainstream media to defend himself. So I would hope that CNN would also offer Nicole the same opportunity to defend herself. Listen to Ro Khanna, man.
Congressman, we have this letter. We just received it that you sent to Nicole Shanahan. What did you say to her?
Well, look, I've known Nicole Shanahan for years. She's been a supporter. I would say she's an acquaintance. And we've shared common issues around the climate, common issues around reproductive rights. And when she called me to say that she was going to join Robert Kennedy's ticket, I said, well, Nicole, why don't you join the Democratic coalition, support President Biden? He will better advance climate. I understand you have disagreements with the president. I do too on certain issues like Gaza, but
pause. So if Nicole told you that she is going to be RFK Jr.'s running mate and RFK Jr. is running outside of the Democratic Party as an independent candidate, why would you then in turn tell her, well, I'd hope you join on with the Biden, campaign and help us over here on the Democrat side? If she wanted to continue working with the Democratic Party, she would have done that. But also what this shows you as well is that maybe Nicole was not as far removed from the Democratic Party as people thought. And this is why some people weren't happy that RFK Jr. picked her. If Ro Khanna has her direct line, if they were speaking to each other behind the scenes like this, that means that Nicole is not that far removed from the Democratic Party. And that could be a problem for RFK Jr.'s campaign going forward.
join the coalition. And then I texted her that, always respectfully, but I was hoping to make the case that her issues would be better served joining the coalition.
So she says that you changed your position, that you actually told her that anyone should run and shouldn't be threatened for doing so. She posted this exchange on X, and then you responded to her with a text that you sent her afterwards. What's your response to her claiming that you're not telling the truth?
Well, I don't think she's saying that. I did say that anyone has the right to run and that no one should threaten her or no one should engage in character assassination of her, and I stand by that. And even in the text I sent her, I said, look, she has absolutely the right to run, and I will never disparage her personally. But I will make the case, I'm making the case tonight, that given the stakes, given her own view in regenerative agriculture, on climate, on reproductive rights, how could she aid candidacy that's simply going to help reelect Donald Trump? And
pause. So let me make something very clear what Ro Khanna is actually talking about, folks. What he's really saying to you is that when he told Nicole everyone has a right to run, he meant within the Democratic Party. He didn't mean outside the Democratic Party. And even then, it sounds like he just wants her to basically help Joe Biden win re-election. It is none of your business. And why is Ro Khanna doing this dirty work behind the scenes? Who put Ro Khanna up to this? Who said, hey, Ro Khanna, you and Nicole are both in Silicon Valley area. How about you be the one to start a petition to get her to step down and walk away from the campaign? Like, what kind of mess is this? You cannot sit there and tell us that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy and you're doing this behind the scenes. This is why people look at the Democratic Party and they laugh at them and they call them hypocrites and they call them cheaters. What a mess.
I want to make the case for her that she'd be better served supporting Joe Biden.
So by all of this, are you saying that you are worried that an RFK candidacy will end up costing President Biden the election?
I think the president can win regardless, but will it make it harder for the president? Absolutely. I mean,
that's his problem. That's Joe Biden's problem, and it's his problem to try to fix. But for you to sit up there and tell people what they can't do, what campaign they can't be a part of, what they can't participate in. Let's talk about this for a second. Nicole is a whole grown ass woman. Who are you to come in like her dad and basically say, yeah, you shouldn't do this, step down and come back over to the Democratic Party and help us? This is wild. And see, now people see some of the things that goes on behind the scenes. This is what I was trying to tell you guys before about the DNC and what they did to Bernie Sanders. This is what they do behind the doors. This really wasn't supposed to get out the way that it did. I don't think he thought that Nicole was going to push back the way that she did.
I don't think that is revealing any unique math. I mean, the reality is that any third-party candidates help Donald Trump because he cannot get to 50%. And so if we lower the ceiling of what he needs to get, it makes it harder for the president to win. Do I think the president can overcome that? We can overcome that and win? Yes. But why diminish the odds and help tilt any advantage to Donald Trump?
Well, then Joe Biden should have been a better president, Ro Khanna. And me and you have had this conversation before on my own damn show. Joe Biden should have been a better president and you wouldn't be in this situation. But let me tell you what he's saying. So if he did this to Nicole, who else is he doing this to? Did Ro Khanna reach out to any other third party or independent candidates? Has he reached out to Dr. West? Has he reached out to Jill? So, well, he probably gonna reach out to Jill. Sorry, he probably gonna reach out to Jill because Jill has done this before, and Jill is definitely unwavering. She's run as third-party candidate before, so he probably did not go there. But who else did he reach out to, or who else is he planning to reach out to? Let's ask ourselves this question, guys. Is Ro Khanna behind the scenes trying to sabotage the third party and independent candidates by doing what he did to Nicole to other candidates as well? It makes you think. It makes you wonder. It'll come out.
Do you think that Nicole Shanahan is aware of what you are saying there, that this could end up resulting in a Trump presidency yet again?
I don't know. I'd love to have that conversation with her publicly, maybe on your show. I mean, the reality is she's been extraordinary in funding regenerative agriculture in places like Iowa State. She has worked on big climate issues. And so I was perplexed, baffled why she would choose to enter at this time, given the stakes that it's a binary choice. Ordinarily, I understand you want to get your views out, you want to push for reform, but I hope she understands that what she is doing really could put Trump back in the White House and undermine the goals that she believes in.
I mentioned.
No, that would have been Biden's presidency that puts Trump back in the White House. This is not on the voters. This is not on Nicole. This is not on any of the third party or independent presidential candidates. This is all on Joe Biden and the promises that he made and he reneged onto the American people. So just keep that in mind. This is Ro Khanna trying to blame all these other people. And Ro Khanna look a little bit embarrassed. Look at his face. He look a little bit embarrassed. You look like a whole ass clown, okay? Because you tried to tell a grown woman what she should or should not do politically and who she should or should not work for, and your ass got out. You didn't expect her to put that out on Twitter. That's the thing. So she got ahead of the situation. Before it was released, the press release, she got ahead of it, and he wasn't expecting that.
In tonight's reporting that the New York-based RFK Jr. campaign official, she previously promoted these false claims that the 2020 election was rigged, and she actually attended the January 6th rally. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's appalling. Look, I used to admire Robert Kennedy's environmental activism, and I just don't understand what he's doing. I mean, denying that January 6th, that the people who beat police officers vandalized the building and were attacking colleagues of mine while I was in the complex, that is somehow just a form of protest, which is what he has said, and people shouldn't be prosecuted. And then being more to the right, way more to the right than either Donald Trump or Joe Biden on his unconditional support for Netanyahu. I mean, I just don't understand what he's trying to achieve.
I don't understand what you're trying to achieve either, Ro Khanna, because let me explain something, guys. This situation could have seriously just hurt Ro Khanna's presidential chances in 2028. Now, remember, there have been discussions about that before, that he may be considering doing something like that. This situation. because Ro Khanna just revealed to everybody that he's sneaky as hell. Now, let's go ahead and bring up what he's referring to here. It's this video that has been making the rounds. Video shows RFK Jr.'s New York director laying out a clear plan. The Kennedy voter and the Trump voter, our mutual enemy is Biden. Listen to this.
So there's no Biden voters in the House, right? No. Okay, good. Things, I guess, will change over time because you do have to only pick one candidate at the end of the day. But the Kennedy voter and the Trump voter, the enemy, our mutual enemy is Biden. Since Biden is counting on us with Bobby in the mix, my thought is for the Republicans. See, Bobby right now, he's pulling from both sides.
Let me pause here. Everybody look at this. Election 2024, how do we benefit from RFK Jr. on the ballot? Best strategic opportunity to block Biden. Listen to this. Trump can't win New York. New York has not elected a Republican president in 40 years. New York is assumed Democrat. Biden counts the 28 electoral votes in his favor automatically. 270 wins the presidency. And other blue states followed our example. Biden cannot win. New York can send a message of independence. Dems compromise just under half New York voters. Republicans are 22% and no affiliation are 23%. Bobby, is a landing pad for delusion Democrats. So for those of you that live in New York, you listening to this?
Right now, he's actually pulling a little bit more from Biden, which explains why the DNC is kind of ganging up on him. They have a special committee to go after independent candidates. Yeah, they say independent candidates, like non-affiliated candidates. They really mean Bobby, because Bobby's the only third party that anybody's taking seriously. So they developed a committee just to go after him and to get him off of the ballot in any way they can. Especially, it seems as though they're going after the battleground states more than the deep blue states. Bobby's moving the blues on his own. If the Republicans accepted the fact that New York, Maryland, Chicago, Illinois, California, New Jersey, Connecticut, most of the Northeast is going to go blue, why wouldn't we put our vote to Bobby and at least get rid of Biden and get those 28 electoral votes in New York? The card's a little wrong. It says 26 electoral votes. Give those 28 electoral votes to Bobby rather than to Biden, thereby reducing Biden's 270. And we all know how that works, right? 270 wins the election. If you don't get to 270, if nobody gets to 270, then Congress picks the president. So who are they going to pick? Who are they going to pick? If it's a Republican Congress, they'll pick Trump. So we're rid of Biden either way.
Okay, so let's think about something here, folks. Honestly, Shannon says desperation is setting in pretty early. Yeah, honestly, it sounds like an interesting strategy, but if you think about it, if the DNC would have played fair with the Dem primary challengers, the Biden administration wouldn't even be in this situation. If they would have played fair with all the Democrat primary challengers, including RFK when he was running as a Democrat, they wouldn't be in this situation. But they decided to rig it. They decided to not have a debate. They decided, not to even pretty much acknowledge these other candidates that were running in the Democratic Party. So there you go. So then they got mad when he decided to run as an independent. It's crazy, man. Let me go to the comments here. What a doozy. Where are we? Thank you. Thank you, Sparky. Great work, Sabby. Thank you. The Oracle says, what's up with my thingies? It's humid. It's like humid. I'm not dealing with that. The Oracle says, what makes him think that Nicole's concerns would be served at all under Biden, let alone better served? That's a good point. I don't know. Valerie says, the list of reasons for me not to vote for the duopoly is becoming endless. Yeah. Thank you, Sir Bikes a lot. Ro looks like an evil Hindu god on CNN. Evil God. Isaac says, let both of these mainstream parties eat their own tail. Be Easy says, RFK is a Democrat. He wanted to run as one. Yep. And Trimble says, why everyone all of a sudden calling him Bobby like he's a 5-year-old? I don't know. It's kind of funny though. But I don't know. Let's get those comments on Rockfin. All right. Thank you, Skip. RFK just left the Democratic Party. So how long has he been out? How long he's been out is immaterial. Problem is they both, Nicole and RFK, may withdraw and endorse Joe. That is a Bernie worry. It has been done before. And thank you for this. I am not a Trump voter. However, can you prove Biden is better than Trump? At least T cannot hold up pictures of 13,000 Gaza unalive babies and 500,000 unalive Ukrainians. Interesting there, Skip. Although he has the coup in Venezuela, he has Syrian casualties. Don't forget bombing Syria that happened under Trump. Don't forget about that as well. And also Afghanistan. So both presidents have done it. Biden's has been worse. But both presidents have done it. Yeah. I don't know, man. I'm starting to feel like RFK won't endorse Joe Biden because I feel like he really wants to stick it to the Democrats because of how they treated him. But I don't know, man. Anything is possible. I do know this. If that does happen and they do drop out and endorse Joe Biden, I know a lot of RFK supporters are going to be very mad. So, all right, let's get to this story. Norm Finkelstein and Alan Dershowitz, round 2 on Piers Morgan. I thought this was a very interesting conversation. There are some funny moments because Alan Dershowitz is horrible. I can't. I'm so sick of this guy. I'm so sick of him. Okay. I've had it with this guy. Let's go ahead and dive in. I don't know why Pierce puts himself through this, but here we go. We are getting started with this wait a minute. Did I highlight it? Oh, this part here. Do both sides have a legitimate cause for complaint? Let's dive in here.
You look at that in totality. Some people have said to me, if you actually go back to this period in time, both sides have a legitimate cause for complaint. Would you agree with that?
I can't agree with that because we have to stick hard and fast to the factual record. The factual record is fairly clear on what happened in 1947 to 49 in the case of Israel and Palestine. Roughly 750,000 Palestinians from what became the state of Israel were either expelled or fled in fear and ended up refugees. Now, it's important to keep in mind, Piers, because you, and I think generously, agreed to talk about the background. Frankly, I think you're the first person I've noticed willing to talk about the background, that about 270,000 of those Palestinians who were expelled during the first Arab-Israeli war, they ended up in Gaza. So if we want to take the point as a point of departure, 1947 to 49, the point of departure for Gaza is exactly the same. That's how Gaza became Gaza. 70% of the population of Gaza became Palestinian refugees. Now, as to the question of what's sometimes called a population exchange between the Arabs who resided the Jews who reside in the Arab world versus the Arabs who resided in what became the state of Israel, there really isn't. I don't want to get involved now in a scholarly debate because it's simply not the time and place. But there isn't any good scholarship on what happened with those Arab Jews in 1948. Some, like the Yemeni Jews, everybody agrees they came willingly. The question of the Iraqi Jews it's kind of a blur what happened. I'm not going to take one position or another on it. But I don't think those other aspects of the conflict ought to distract us from the fundamental question that you asked, and I think it's a very good question, to look at the background. And the background to what happened on October 7th, it began with the expulsion of about 300,000 Palestinians into Gaza, and now they comprise about 70 to 80% of the population of Gaza and their descendants.
Okay, well, Alan Dershowitz, you're disagreeing with what you're hearing there. Why?
Alan Dershowitz always looks like an angry potato. Like every time I see him, he looks like his face kind of looked like a potato. Seriously. But the point that Norm is making there, that's important to know. This is why we continue to say this didn't start on October 7th. And you got to think about it. All those people that were basically refugees in Gaza, right? So then you got to think about the people that were born in that, caged in space, that open air prison. How do you expect those people, what mindset are they going to have? Like, they know that they're basically in prison. They can't move around freely. Like, what kind of life is that for someone to have?
Fundamentally, the Nakba was a self-imposed wound. Ben-Gurion, when he announced the establishment of Israel, welcomed all the Arabs to stay. He didn't want to expel a single one. But the Arab countries engaged in a genocidal war designed to kill every Jew and destroy Israel. It was as a result of that invasion that Palestinians left or were expelled. Now, I happen to have studied the situation with Iraqi Jews because I was one of those people who helped draft Resolution 242 at the United Nations. And we looked at great detail into the history of Jews in places like Iraq. In Iraq, there was a Nazi pogrom during the Second World War. And there were additional pogroms in other Arab countries in which Jews had no choice but to leave. And there was an exchange of population, much as there were in Sudetenland, much as there were in Pakistan and India. And every other country in the world, the refugees were incorporated, assimilated into the society. But UNRWA, this horrible, horrible organization, was set up to keep the Arabs refugees, to keep them in camps, to make sure there was a festering wound. The Jews were integrated into society. No, they weren't first-class citizens in the beginning, but now they dominate the country. The same thing.
Pause. Did you pay attention to what he just said there? He said, no, they weren't first-class citizens in the beginning, but now they dominate the country. So I don't know if that was a slip of the tongue or if that was intentional or not, but that's Alan Dershowitz admitting to you who is in power. So this is why when people try to put the Palestinian people and the Israelis on the same level, you really just can't. So there's that. He's talking about the food. He's talking about UNRWA. Again, notice how he's trying to blame the oppressed for their own oppression. That's what he's doing. Pay attention to that, folks. People did the same type of rhetoric, right? People had the same type of rhetoric during slavery. They had the same type of rhetoric during Jim Crow laws. That's why this is so incredibly dangerous. You cannot blame oppressed people for their own oppression. That is what Alan Dershowitz is doing. This guy is very trained. He has been a trained liar. That's why you keep seeing him pop up everywhere to debate this subject.
Could have happened to the Arabs who left Israel. They could have been integrated into the surrounding countries. Instead, they were kept in camps and told that they had to destroy Israel. They had to have a right of return. They had to go back. That history can't stop and you can't move forward. You have to only move backwards. So the sole fault for the refugees was the attack by the Arab countries designed to kill Israelis. That's when the expulsions and the leavings occurred.
And
so
Alan, before I go back to Norman for response to that, from your understanding, how many Jewish people were displaced from their homes in this early period? Because I've heard it was actually a lot.
It was between 700,000 and 800,000, with probably $1 trillion worth of wealth These were people who had lived in these countries longer than the Muslims. They had lived there since the Babylonian exile 2,000 years earlier. They had been full citizens. They were dhimmis. They were second class because they were not Muslims, but they lived in peace. And once this happened, many were expelled. Some left voluntarily. I can see that to Mr. Finkelstein. But many left. About the same number were left voluntarily. Remember, too, with the Arabs, they were told to leave, and they would come back victorious after. In Haifa, for example, many of them wanted to stay, and many did stay. But the Arab leadership said, leave, we'll come back victorious, you'll have everything back. This is a complex situation. It's 75 years ago. There is a statute of limitations on things like this, a moral statute of limitations. Move on. Establish yourselves in the countries that you left and went to. Get rid of these refugee camps. Get rid of UNRWA. And
it's UNRWA for one, and number two. So you see what he's trying to do? He's trying to tell the Palestinian people, forget about the past, forget about your history, and just move on. Where does that rhetoric sound familiar? Where have we heard that before, ladies and gentlemen? Haven't we heard people say the same kind of phrases here in the United States to certain groups here in the United States? Move on, forget about the past, move forward. Let's not talk about that. That's to make the people who occupied you and the people who oppressed you feel comfortable.
Become full citizens of the countries you moved to, the way my grandparents became full citizens of the United States
let me go
after pogroms had made them leave Poland.
Okay, come to Norman Finkelstein. Your response to that?
Okay, thank you, Piers. First of all, as a general point, I agree with the notion of a statute of limitations on your claims to a parcel of land. The first time I came across that expression was reading Arnold Toynbee's great history of the world, actually. And he makes the point in his history that isn't there a statute of limitation on the claims of Jews to Palestine? He said that claim was made 2,000 years ago. And it's claimed that, even today it's claimed that, based on what happened 2,000 years ago, there's a large portion of Israeli population who believes they have title to the West Bank, they have title to Gaza, because of that claim 2,000 years ago. Isn't there a statute of limitations? Allow me to complete my thought, and then you can disagree. Isn't there a statute of limitations on the claim from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago? Now, I want to focus on Gaza. I would like to focus on Gaza. The population is expelled from Israel into Gaza. Now, if you look at Benny Morris's history called Border Wars, he says that between 1949 and 1953, literally, listen closely, about 2,700 to 5,000 Palestinian expellees, that's including in the West Bank and in Gaza, between 2,700 and 5,000 Palestinian expellees were killed by Israel when they tried to return home. Now, Benny Morris says 90% of those killed were unarmed. They were what he called economic infiltrees who wanted to see their homes.
Now, let's pause here for a second. The killing of unarmed people. Where does that sound familiar? Didn't we just see a guy on the news, or I saw on social media actually, was shot by the police and he was unarmed? Remember, the police in the United States, they got their training from the IDF in Israel. So you see how they have similar tactics, shooting unarmed people?
They wanted to see their land. They wanted to see their neighbors. They were brutally, if you believe Professor Morris, brutally murdered between those years. In 1956, as you know, Piers, England, France, and Israel invaded Egypt, including at the time Gaza. What happened then? according to Benny Morris in the book Border Wars, he said between 470 and 500 Palestinian men were lined up and shot down. Now let's bear in mind, Piers, this is long, long before this entity called Hamas came into the picture. Now, if we fast forward to 1967, after Israel occupies Gaza, there are new assaults on the people of Gaza, this time carried on by, at the time, Agricultural Minister Ariel Sharon. Now, without getting sidetracked, I do have to say, Professor Dershowitz, every time I listen to you, even when we debated each other in 2003, I guess, or 2004, I can't recall, you keep escalating your claims about having written UN Resolution 242 or contributed to the resolution. Professor Dershowitz, I understand people have fantasies, and I understand that people have failings of memory as they get older. But Professor Dershowitz, when we had our original debate, you didn't even know who wrote UN Resolution 242. You had all these names. It was Lord Carradine. Anybody who was involved in the process would know that. So let's agree on one thing. We both of us should agree to only state facts. And if we have any doubts about the facts, let's set them aside and try to give listeners, as accurate a record as possible. We can do.
Let's pause for just a second. It's really funny because, I don't think he was expecting Norm to go there, but yeah, it's just like Alan Dershowitz lies a lot. But there's something else here I want to add as well. Notice the examples that Norm gave. Those were things that happened to the Palestinian people prior to the creation of Hamas. So the point that needs to be made there is that everybody keeps saying this started October 7th, which I told you that is not the case. And then when you bring up the history of it, Zionists like Alan Dershowitz will be like, well, they came after Israelis first. And so that's why they had to be occupied and to protect and to keep Israelis safe. But Norm just gave you multiple examples of atrocities that happened to the Palestinian people prior to Hamas. So what was the reason then? Alan will go on to make up some stuff,
Disagree. But when you engage in your fantasies, it really, to me, is very disturbing and disorienting.
Okay. Well, let me ask Professor Dershowitz to respond.
Well, first of all, let's get the facts straight. I was Arthur Goldberg's law clerk. Arthur Goldberg was the United States representative to the United Nations. He asked me to come down. I actually moved in with him at the Waldorf Astoria Towers and work with him on 242. Yes, I confused the name Carrington with something else, but I worked closely. In fact, I was partly responsible for changing the words. I'm sorry. I worked on the matter. I didn't work with Lord Carradine. I worked with Arthur Goldberg. And
so you lied. I still think he lied about Epstein too, you guys. I still think when he was on Kim Iverson's show, I think he was lying about that too.
Together, we managed to get rid of the word Palestinian before refugees in order to make sure that the resolution applied both to Palestinian refugees and to Jewish refugees.
Science fiction, which I can easily prove.
Now you're interrupting me. So let me finish. This is a detail. It's a fact. Now let's talk about what happened involving the Gaza Strip. I agree there's a statute of limitations. I'm opposed to any biblical claims on Israel. I believe Israel has a political and moral claim to the land. There have always been Jews living there from the time of Jesus and Muhammad to 1948. And wisely, the British decided for a compromise plan for division. And that plan was accepted by the Jewish and Zionist leaders. It was rejected by the Palestinians. And then, as you know, Israel tried to give the entire Gaza Strip over to Egypt, back to Egypt during the Camp David Accords. It almost caused a breakdown in the Camp David meetings because the Egyptians didn't want it, and Israel very reluctantly held on to it. And then in 2005, Israel abandoned the Gaza. And only when rockets and a bloody coup occurred did Israel respond by having border controls. Let me tell you one thing. They weren't strong enough. If there had been better border controls, Hamas would not have been allowed to bring in concrete, which it used to build tunnels, to bring in weapons, which it used to murder all these people on October 7th. So Israel was not strong enough. It should have had far better border controls, as other countries had in comparable situations.
Netanyahu actually, literally funded Hamas. Literally funded Hamas.
And so, one more point. Toynbee and Benny Morris both are regarded as kind of one-sided historians. There are claims that dispute both of them, particularly Toynbee. Toynbee was an overtly anti-Zionist historian who didn't believe that the Jewish people had any claim to Israel. There's also a statute of limitations on that. And so let's move forward. And moving forward means potentially a solution where Hamas is no longer in control of Gaza. Remember, too, you're absolutely right, Norman. Terrorism began way before Hamas. Terrorism was an essential part of the Palestinian leadership. The Olympic massacres that occurred way before Hamas. The terrorism on airplanes.
See how he's smearing Arabic people? You see what he's doing? How he's putting that smear out there to scare people and tell people that they were always terrorists and stuff like that. But see, if it was the other way around, and if you made those types of statements about Israelis, you would be called anti-Semitic. But you see how he can just sit up there and smear Arabic people?
Blowing up of airplanes, the hijacking of airplanes. The problem is that the world rewarded terrorism, and it's rewarding them again by allowing Hamas to free hundreds of people, legitimately, many convicted, and not all convicted, many convicted, in exchange for a small number of completely innocent hostages. You can't compare completely innocent hostages with convicted murderers.
Okay. Look, Norman, respond to that, but also, I also want to move on.
Yes.
Once you've responded to it, also move on, if you will, to the issue of settlements, because one of the things I find hardest to have any sympathy with Israel about is the continued expansion of settlements.
I agree.
And in particular on the West Bank, and I think we may find some consensus here. But first of all, Norman, your response to what Alan Dershowitz just said, but also then move it to settlements.
Yeah, well, I would like to try to, actually I can bring it up to the settlements on the case of Gaza. So I would like to just continue where I left off with, so to speak, at the risk of being boring, the timeline. I said in 1970, there were atrocities committed in Gaza against the people of Gaza by the headed by the agricultural minister at the time, Ariel Sharon. In 1987, as you perhaps remember, Piers, the first Intifada broke out. It was overwhelmingly, here I quote Benny Morris from his book, Righteous Victims, it was an overwhelmingly nonviolent civil resistance to the Israeli occupation.
Yeah, I heard that too, Spark Joy. Somebody is eating potato chips. I was like, is someone opening like a candy wrapper or something? I heard that too.
By 1990, 3 years after the beginning, or really 2 years, because it began on December 7th, 1987, by 1990, Israel started to institute, again, I'm sticking strictly to Gaza, what it called a closure policy. And the closure policy was basically to seal off Gaza, okay? By 2002, 2003, if you read Baruch Kimmerling, he was a senior sociologist at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He described Gaza as, quote, the largest concentration camp ever. Yep. Now, you might say Baruch Kimmerling was a person of the left, and I will grant that. But then we have Giora Eiland. Giora Eiland at the time was the head of Israel's National Security Council. He said in March 2003, and now I'm quoting him, he described Gaza as a huge concentration camp. So you can say there is a consensus among knowledgeable people, sociologists at the Hebrew University, head of the National Security Council, that Israel had turned Gaza into a concentration camp. In 2006, there was an election in January 2006. Hamas wins the election basically on the platform of reform, because the Palestinian Authority is proverbially corrupt. It comes into power. Immediately as it comes into power, Israel institutes this brutal economic blockade on Gaza.
Yep.
And at that point, there have been various descriptions. I'm sure, Piers, you wouldn't disagree. You wouldn't call The Economist a left-wing magazine or anti-Semitic. It described Gaza as, quote, a toxic dump.
Yep.
And at that point, it had slowly, just to give you one example, Piers, and your listeners, because they should have a sense of what this blockade looked like. Israel's explicit policy was to keep Gaza on the precipice of economic catastrophe. That's how they described their policy. They prohibited baby chicks from entering Gaza. They prohibited chocolate from entering Gaza. They prohibited potato chips from entering Gaza. They prohibited any spices from entering Gaza.
But they didn't prevent this potato chip. Look at Alan Dershowitz's face. Look at the expression on his face. Isn't this scary? It's kind of scary. You know, he actually, his eyes lit up like that when Norm started to mention potato chips.
And it prohibited any exports from Gaza, except at some points, occasionally, things like strawberries. So what had happened to Gaza? It had, on the eve of 2007, it had the highest unemployment rate in the world. It was about 60% unemployed, 50% for the population as a whole, 60% for youth. The people in Gaza were left to languish and die. No past, no present, no future. To languish and die in the concentration camp. That was their prospect as of October 6, 2003. Excuse me. Yeah, 2023. Sorry about that.
May I respond?
Well, I tell you what, yes, actually, on that point, Professor Dershowitz.
Yeah, we're going to move on to the West Bank. Where did I? Oh, yes. This part right here. Name me one intentional body. This part is very important. Don't play here.
Like you to
one
do.
Sentence.
Well, listen,
allow me.
Oh, you, okay, give me one sentence, but then please address the issue of settlements.
One sentence. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, 1,000 humanitarian and economic organizations have all reached the same conclusion. It's very simple. The main cause of the disaster in Gaza is Israel's illegal blockade of that parcel of land. Full stop.
That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's false.
Who's wrong? Who's wrong? UNCTAD is
That's
wrong.
false.
The World Bank
the
is
blockade,
wrong. The International Monetary Fund is wrong. They're all wrong.
Yes.
Are
yes,
they all anti-Semitic?
Yes,
is that what's going on?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. They're wrong.
But it was coming. So notice how when he's referring to all those organizations, any organization or any person that criticizes Israel, they're always wrong, according to Zionists. You have your information incorrect. You misunderstood. They're trained to push back on this. So you mean to tell me the UN and all these organizations are incorrect, but you're right?
I happen to know
So
more
why
about
are they
the
all
law
wrong?
than any of them. Because the blockade was completely lawful. It was designed to prevent the importation and then the use of rockets against Israel. It's perfectly lawful for a country to engage in a blockade. That is, you're not. Let me finish. You can't have a double. Look, Israel is exposed to a double standard, but we're not letting you impose a double standard on me. No, I'm going to finish my statement, and you're not going to interrupt me.
Potato got angry.
So understand me. The military occupation was lawful. The blockade was lawful. Every country has the right to defend itself from rockets, from terror tunnels, from people coming over the border, murdering and kidnapping people. Those are all lawful. I'm telling you that as an expert in international law and the law of war.
Okay.
If you want to dispute me, get an expert who knows something about international law.
Okay.
Not a.
How is this guy an expert in everything? You were Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. You claim to be an expert in international law. You also claim to be some type of historian. How are you no one is an expert in everything, but Alan Dershowitz apparently was everywhere at every time with everyone and is an expert in everything. Make it make sense, people.
Not a polemicist like
Professor Dershowitz, okay. Professor Dershowitz, just as a matter of fact, I teach the laws of war. I've been teaching it for the last 5 years. To my understanding,
you're biased.
Okay, Professor Dershowitz. Okay, Professor Dershowitz. Let's.
So he teaches something, but Alan Dershowitz said, "Yeah, you teach it, but you don't know anything about it." Everybody is wrong except for the Zionists. Does everybody? You see this now? Everyone is wrong except for them.
Disagree. I'm completely ignorant. Let's take that as a point of departure. How does it come to be that every humanitarian and political body in the world has declared that the blockade of Gaza constitutes collective punishment and therefore is a violation, a breach of international law, a war crime under international law? How did that come to pass?
They're wrong.
How is it that
first of all, you're wrong.
They're all wrong.
No, you're not.
You're
not
wrong,
right.
Except
you're
Alan
not right.
Dershowitz.
No.
Except
you're wrong.
Sir,
you're wrong in describing.
Professor Dershowitz.
You're wrong in describing every group. There are many
name
groups.
Me one. Okay, Professor Dershowitz. Name me one legal international legal body or human rights organization. Name me one. I'll take the pause. Name me one. That says the blockade of Gaza is not collective punishment. Name me one.
The Lawfare Project in the United States.
The Lawfare Project. I said, name me one international legal or political body.
It is.
One.
It is.
Everybody's listening now.
Legal body.
Piers Morgan has a very large audience. Name me one. Name me one international or legal or political body that says the blockade of Gaza is legal. Name me one.
It is legal, and every organization that I have been associated with, the Lawfare Project, the project run by a woman named Leitner, an international project, were all concluded that the blockade is legal. Also, the Israeli Supreme let me finish. The Israeli Supreme Court, which is above reproach and which is much fairer than the International Court of Justice, has also, with limits, has said that blockades designed to prevent the bringing of rockets to Israel is lawful. Also,
of course, the Israeli Supreme Court is going to protect the Israeli people, you dummy. Of course, that's going to happen. Of course, the Israel Supreme Court is going to agree with the blockade. That's just like having Israel investigate itself. Those things should be independent and should come from outside. Now, listen to what he says about the ICJ. This is interesting.
Use your common sense. What possible reason would there be for allowing a group in Gaza, a group of Hamas, to send rockets without trying to blockade them from bringing the rockets in and building tunnels? Use your common sense. Of course it's unlawful. Okay. Every country in the world would do exactly the same as Israel did.
Listen, I think we've exhausted this part of the debate.
From being
I do want to, before we run out of time, we only have about 5 minutes left, and I do want to get into settlements. And I'll start with you, Professor FINKELSTEIN. The issue of settlements, I think, is pretty much indefensible actually, what's been going on, and particularly in recent years on the West.
No, of course not. They are not war crimes at all. They are disputes over what constitutes the UN resolution 242.
But if the UN says they're illegal, if the UN says they're illegal, where does that leave it?
The UN says a lot of things. The UN, the UN also called Israel Zionism racism.
So hold on to that part right there, because let me tell you what he's actually saying. When he said the Israel Supreme Court is above reproach, and now he tells you, well, the UN says a lot of things are illegal. What he is really saying to you is that when it comes down to war crimes, they're talking about the settlements. I skipped you that part for sake of time. When they're talking about war crimes, when they're talking about those illegal settlements, etc., all the things that are happening to the Palestinian people, what he's telling you is that Israel is above all of those organizations. Israel is above the UN. They're above the ICJ, which he says in this debate that he said the ICJ is actually not legitimate. Again, nothing is legitimate when they're criticizing Israel. So he goes on to mention those things. He's telling you that Israel, what they decide to do in Israel is above everything and every other organization and is above international law. And that is what he's telling you. And that's what I want you to write down and take home with you and pass on to your friends, because that is incredibly dangerous. We have heard this type of rhetoric before. And we cannot go back to a space like that. Israel needs to be dismantled. People have to put the state of Israel in its place. And I don't know what's going to happen after this war in Gaza, but I will say one thing. The world now has its eyes on the state of Israel, and the world is now able to see that Israel has been getting away with things that none of these other neighboring countries to Israel would be able to get away with, and how incredibly dangerous the Israeli government has become, not just to the Palestinian people, but to the entire world. This is why Nicaragua has gone to the ICJ. That's why South Africa started this in the beginning and went to the ICJ. They have put Israel's behavior on the international stage during a time of social media.
The UN has no authority to define international law. The UN can give advisory opinions.
Judges,
who does?
But let me please let me finish. So remember who appoints the justices. Countries appoint the justices. So when Lebanon appoints a justice, it's Hezbollah's appointing the justice. The International Court of Justice is an illegitimate court. It is not a real court. But I want to get to the core.
See? You see that?
Point. What Finkelstein finally says. Wait a minute.
Let me pause for a second. We'll get back to this. If the ICJ is an illegitimate court, according to Alan Dershowitz, are they an illegitimate court when it comes to Russia? Are they an illegitimate court when it comes to Russia and Ukraine? Because this is the same type of talking point that John Kirby will make, the State Department will make, is that, yeah, well, the ICJ said that, but we're not going to change anything that we do differently here in reference to Israel. It's the ICJ. They actually can't enforce anything. That's what the State Department told you. However, when the ICJ ruled against Russia and the actions that Russia was doing, all of a sudden the ICJ is legitimate. It's only illegitimate when they're criticizing Israel.
Let me finish, please. Let me finish. Let me finish. What Finkelstein is finally saying is that these people, he called them martyrs. I was at Beirut. I was at the Nova Music Festival. I saw the remnants of where a woman named Vivian Silver, a peacenik, who used to go over and bring Hamas and Gazan people to hospitals, was burnt to death. I saw where people were raped. There is no justification for collective rape. There is no justification for murdering a peacenik. This woman.
If he feels there's no justification for that, then why was he Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer? Why were you hanging out on Epstein's island? And by the way, they keep repeating the same talking point. That talking point has been debunked multiple times. The New York Times has had to retract that article because there was no evidence for those claims. This is the same guy that was Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. This is the same guy that defended Jeffrey Epstein on Kim Iverson's show. That's who Alan Dershowitz hung out with on Epstein's Island. You have no room. This guy has no room to talk about that. None whatsoever. Because we see who your friends are. Did you say that to Jeffrey Epstein, Alan? Did you say that to him? Did you tell Epstein that what he was doing to those little girls was a fucking problem? Did you tell him that, Alan? I don't think so.
Was probably murdered by the very people she brought to hospitals because they knew exactly where she lived and where the hospitals. It's an abomination to even suggest that any kind of martyrdom, dispute over land, dispute over any, could justify what happened on October 7th. Shame on anybody who thinks that civilized human beings should be praised or even justified for doing what they did. I met a man whose son had been beheaded, and Hamas then took his head, brought it back to Gaza, put it on sale for $10,000, and this father had to bury his son without a head.
I don't believe half the things that this guy is saying. Again, a lot of these things have not been proven. Norm responds to whether or not he will actually condemn those people. I think this is an important part.
We'll end with Norma Finkelstein's response and answer that question. I think it's a legitimate question.
My response is exactly the same one I gave you the very first time I met you, Piers. There were atrocities, large atrocities, that occurred on October 7th. I think it's indisputable. You then asked me, would you consider it terrorism? I then replied to you, I think atrocities denote terrorism. However, I said I take the same attitude towards the perpetrators of those atrocities as the abolitionists in the United States took towards the Nat Turner Rebellion. Nat Turner,
so you justify them, so you praise them, so you glorify them, and you honor them. That's the reality.
Piers, can I finish?
Yeah.
Can I finish?
Yeah.
Nat Turner and the slave revolt committed horrible atrocities. The abolitionists said horrible things happened, but they never condemned
No, they
Nat
don't
Turner.
happen. They
What
are
they
perpetrated
what they
by
did
people.
was
You're justifying
what
it.
they
Shame
did
on
was
Finkelstein.
allow me to
This
finish.
is the lowest point
Piers,
you've ever
please tell
gotten
them
to,
to stop.
and you've gotten to low points. But this is the lowest point you've gotten to, comparing these rapists and these murderers
Well, I think let him,
to
I think
abolitionists.
Alan, let him
is the
finish.
lowest point in your history.
Let him finish what he's trying to say.
You were friends with one. You were friends with a guy who basically was running a sex trafficking ring.
Thank you.
Let me have
By
the
the way,
last word.
Nat Turner's rebellion, in Nat Turner's rebellion, they committed horrible atrocities, including beheading babies. That's a fact. However, the
And you're
abolitionists,
justifying that.
They did
And you're
not,
justifying that.
They did not. Please, Piers, can you please tell him to
I think
stop?
let him finish the point he's making, and then you respond.
Okay. Thank you so much. However, the abolitionists did not condemn the perpetrators. The abolitionists kept saying, we told you so. We told you so. We told you so. If you treat people like that, what happened with the slave revolt inevitably would happen. And I say, if you lock 2 million people in a concentration camp for 20 years, half of whom are children who were born into that concentration camp, don't react with shock and dismay and disbelief and indignation at what happened on October 7th. I have spent the last 20 years, I have spent the last 20 years of my life studying what's been done to the people of Gaza. And each time I reread what I wrote, I'm more firm than ever before. I will not condemn those people, even as I acknowledge that massive, unspeakable atrocities occurred on October 7th.
Okay. Alan.
And that was the mic drop moment right there, because that's really what it comes back home to, right? Is the fact that this is what happens when you occupy people and you oppress people. And what does international law say about that? It says that they have the right to resist. Not only do they have the right to resist, but they have a right to an armed resistance. That's international law. I didn't write the law, but that is what it says. So that's important to note. Alan Dershowitz, again, these people are paid propagandists. So I'm going to bring this up and tell you what this comes back to. Thank you, Eric, so much for sharing this. This is well put here. We always got to bring this back to MCDS, money, corruption, demands, and solutions. So this is Eric's thing that he came up with. When this particular situation on Israel and Gaza, go to the MCDS framework. Money, the money situation in reference to Israel, Gaza. You have to remember it's a genocidal land grab and has been for 75 plus years. You know about the resources that are along the Gaza coast. So you have to remember that there is resources there. C, for corruption. Rich Zionists bribe Congress and the presidents into supporting them. This goes back to the Israeli lobby. That's the corruption piece. Then you bring in demand an end to the corruption. And then you bring in solution. Do the hard work of getting big money out of politics and government and do it now. That's the MCDS in reference to Israel and Gaza. It all leads back to the money. And this is why we need corporate money out of electoral politics. So these politicians aren't bought and paid for. There was a time in this country where that was not the case. So you got to bring it back to that. And you have to understand, again, what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal for Israel is not just to cleanse the area. Everybody's getting that part for the most part, but it's to grab the land. And you can't grab the land if the people are still on it. So we always have to remember that, folks. They're not letting certain foods come into Gaza because they don't actually want more generations to actually thrive and be built in Gaza. They don't want that. This is why they couldn't have the olive trees. This is why they couldn't have the spices. They don't want them to have a future. They want the people gone. And for people who say, well, no, it's just because of Hamas, that's why. What's the excuse for kicking the people out of their homes in the West Bank and building the illegal settlements? Always bring it back to that. I'll go to some of the comments here. That was a great debate. Gilbert said, I'm surprised they haven't asked Allen and Epstein in this interview about Epstein. Yes. Thank you, P.S. The poor little Epstein girls who had to be with Al, allegedly, we have to say, because we don't know that. Eric, Russia, Poland, France, and Germany has plenty of land for a new Israel. Thank you, Goba. Alan Dershowitz. Thanks, Sparky. Make Israel Syria again. In those Ottoman Empire days, Levant Jews got along fine with their neighbors, whether Muslim, Christian, or otherwise. And thank you, Tony D. Manchin and Cinema ran USA 2020 to 2022, then Trump and Israel from 2022 to 2024. Biden is a tool. I'll take the comments on Rockfin. Thank you. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin hemp. 9/11 was in the past. We want to look forward. Let every murderer out of jail that was in the past forgive, forget, move on. That's what we have with war criminals and why they keep on killing. And thank you for this as well. The U.S. officially and rightfully labeled the Irgun and Stern gang terrorists. They did drive-bys, bombed tons of markets, and hid guns in synagogues. The USA then negotiated with them, gave them nuclear weapons, and one became prime minister of the illegal apartheid rogue nation of U.S. Ray Hell. Thank you for that. All right, guys. Just another shout out here in case you forget. If you want to follow me anywhere, the best thing to do is to go to my website here. This is the best way to follow me. I don't know why, but the video thing doesn't play on Type VNC, but there's actually a video back here as well. Follow me on my website if you want to find out information as well. Sometimes people email me and they're like, where can I find all this stuff? SabbySabs.com. You can find my merch store, my Substack, my Patreon. All of this is in one place, like on my website. There's award information, community organizing as well, on the ground footage, and of course, more clips actually populate here as time goes by, even some of the shorts, which is interesting. So yeah, that's another thing. You can always find the videos here as well. They just populate on the website as I create them. So SabbySabs.com, that's my one-stop shop there, folks. Okay. Guys, that is it for me. Tomorrow night, Professor Ken Hammond is going to be here. We have a lot to discuss in reference to China. That is his wheelhouse. So it should be a really interesting conversation, and I hope that he'll be able to teach you a lot. And we'll talk a little bit about BRICS as well, and Taiwan's place in all of this. So look forward to that. Chris Hedges will be here Sunday. Don't miss that. Other than that, guys, have a good night. Keep up the fight.